Well, welcome everybody. This is John Evans, and we are doing another Book and Spade Bible study. As many of you will know, I am a vicar in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America and an avid podcaster and lover of Scripture. I'm joined by my beloved wife, Samantha.
Hello.
And as we embark on the Scripture this Holy Week, the commemoration of the death and resurrection of Christ, I just want to encourage all those who may be watching this live stream, along with all of our participants here tonight, my good friends. It doesn't matter what level of knowledge we have of the scripture, the history, the archaeology. For those who believe they already know this thing, there will be surprises. There always are. Scripture is reading us as much as we are reading scripture. To quote Napoleon Bonaparte, who is not necessarily the most spiritually minded of all men, the Bible is a living creature who will destroy all those who oppose her. And of course, we have the acknowledgement for those who are very much new to this text. You will not be lost. You will not say to yourself, oh, where are we? We will not assume anyone's level of beginning at this thing. So, all are truly welcome. We have people from multiple backgrounds, denominations, and even faith perspectives here. We are joined, of course, by my good friend, Abby.
Hello. Thanks for having me again.
I'm joined, of course, by my good brother-at-arms, Adam.
Hey, nice to be here.
We're also joined by my great mentor, Brandon.
It's an honor to be here, John, and with you all.
We're joined by, of course, my good friend and longtime collaborator and true fellow warrior of all things, Tolkien, Matt.
Namaria, everyone.
Indeed. And who else do we have here tonight? Danielle. Welcome, Danielle, as well.
Hi there. Hello, everyone.
We got Izzy. Welcome, Izzy.
Hey, guys.
You're going to love this tonight. It gets good. Ron. Welcome, Ron. That's right.
Hi, guys. Hey, and I brought a straggler. She's an MMA fighter. And what other lies can I tell about you, Sandy? Sandy Bassey. I've known Sandy. She is friends with the Paul Vanderclay, this little corner group of people. She is an excellent, kind-hearted lady who I thoroughly enjoy.
Aw.
Well, more than welcome, Sandy. Please, it is a joy having you with us. We are a very wonderful straggling group ourselves. Usually, most nights I'd be enjoying this group with a tall pint with me. But as I enjoyed that earlier with meetings with fellow clerics, discussing work for the week, it's sadly tea for me this evening. But I wish you a virtual cheers from the bottom of my heart. And Ryan, welcome, brother.
It is good to be with you.
Good to be with you too, man. In the midst of our busy Holy Week, may peace and protection be upon us all.
Amen.
And of course, we got my longtime friend and fellow soldier of the word, Roy.
Hello. I'm here for the prizes.
There's a lot of those in the Gospel of John.
I'm here for the prizes, yeah. Watch out.
Okay. Is that everybody, son?
Right now.
All right. And of course, if more come, more are always welcome. All right. So, of course, we are embarking on the feasts that particularly focus on the crucifixion and resurrection of Christ. And inevitably, the bulk of the New Testament is comprised of accounts of this historical event. But of course, we have favorites, and among my personal favorites, of course, is the account given in John's Gospel. It is popular in even some seminary circles that still exist today to try and draw a wedge between Matthew, Mark, and Luke in their historicity and that of John, meaning a lot of people try to put John on a shelf, try to say John is the poetical, symbolic, allegorical book, Matthew, Mark, and Luke are the nitty-gritty historical texts. I disagree with my whole being and soul. this is among the very few times where you will actually hear me have an axe to grind. I would argue that the archaeological evidence for John's Gospel, recently discovered, by the way, in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the site of the empty tomb of Jesus that is best attested, along with other interesting political details and religious details, which fit beautifully into the time of Jesus, what we call the first century, are found in this text. Now, I'm aware that many of you might already know John very, very well. Some of you may never have opened John at all. But we are going to begin with the arrest of Jesus when he is arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane in John chapter 18. And we'll just take it away from there. And I'll point out some details and we can mention reflections that come to us in our hearts. All right. So any predominant questions before we jump into John 18? To the arrest of Jesus in Gethsemane, according to this text. All right. Okay, Sam, take it away.
All right, let's scoot you over a little bit so I have some space on the screen.
Very good.
Right. John chapter 18. Tonight I'm reading from the NIV version. When he had finished praying, Jesus left with his disciples and crossed the Kidron Valley. On the other side there was a garden, and he and his disciples went into it. Now Judas, who betrayed him, knew the place, because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So Judas came to the garden, guiding a detachment of soldiers and some officials from the chief priests and the Pharisees. They were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons.
Stop there. Anything strike any of us as unusual, fascinating, or peculiar about the way the arrest of Jesus is being set up here?
I think the garden specifically, like that detail is really interesting, right? Well, it parallels kind of the Genesis story, right? So Adam and Eve are like kicked out of the garden, right? Because like they sin. And like Jesus is kicked out of his, like this garden. I mean, this literal garden, right? Just because, but not because of his sin, but because of like everyone else's sin, right? And even kind of like similar details, like the flaming sword of like the angel that, kicked Adam and Eve out, right? Like parallels kind of, the torches and lanterns, right? That these people are carrying. So yeah, I don't know, that maybe one similarity. I don't know like how to place this within the broader theological context, but I don't know, it could be something, but.
Oh, no, I think you're absolutely correct. I think that Jesus's choice to enter into the Garden of Gethsemane is a deliberate attempt on his part, the night of his arrest, to echo Genesis. And I would say that the historical reflection on it, given by Yochanan, given by John, certainly enhances the very image of the flaming sword that you're referring to, for sure. A lot of Western Catholic theology will say that when he enters into Gethsemane, that's the point where Jesus almost has a transference of all the sins of the world. And there is some textual evidence to kind of back that this is certainly a point where we see, of course, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, him in distress a little bit earlier that would hint that indeed a kind of transference has occurred at this moment in a unique way. Other thoughts and reflections or ideas? Things that strike us as unusual, peculiar, sticking out about this passage here?
I have one question. Oh, sorry. Sorry, whoever I interrupted.
No, it's okay. Go ahead, Abby.
Was it normal for well, I mean, not that Jesus was a normal arrest. Like it wasn't he was he wasn't a regular dude. So like this is it wasn't like this was a public arrest, correct?
No, this is very much not a public arrest. And Matthew, Mark, and Luke make it very clear that the high priest wants to arrest Jesus in quiet because he's afraid of retaliation from the crowds.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a crowd, right?
A crowd of their choice.
Ah, okay. Got it. Okay, so it's not just because I mean there were like public arrests and such in that time period, correct? Like most
Oh, yeah.
arrests were
Well, definitely.
probably public, right?
Mhm.
I would argue that while I have no evidence for it directly, I would say that John the Baptizer's arrest was most likely very public.
Hmm.
And recent adaptations have even enhanced that theory.
So like maybe that's something different, that it was not a public thing.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
But it's so interesting because now it's known by, so many people in the world as a thing that happened, even though at the time probably not many people knew about it.
Most people were sleeping, presumably,
Mhm.
after all the good Passover wine, which I recently made myself. And what was your point, Sam, before you hear from Danielle as well? I want to make sure we.
I was gonna say, it says specifically a detachment of soldiers and some officials from the chief priests and the Pharisees. So it's not just a crowd, it's a crowd that was specifically of the religious orders.
Hmm.
And Sam, I want to make sure we get on to the rest of the comments, but
Mhm.
notice the agency, who is directing, who is leading the detachment of soldiers.
That's Judas.
Right. A lot of focus on Judas, 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 which is very fitting for today, which is Spy Wednesday, the traditional day of Judas sealing the deal. All right. And your points, Danielle, as well.
My point was you kind of touched on it a little bit with Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but he's not on his face begging his father with, drops of his sweat falling like blood to the ground, saying, is there any way out of this? He's standing there and facing it head on.
It's interesting that John already has the accounts of the suffering in the garden in hand, and he's accentuating this with other details that he wants to make very, very, very clear. And you're right, the emphasis is very different here. It's very, very different. We're going to see a bit of a confrontation between Jesus and the powers that be.
Just want to highlight one thing, John.
Yeah.
It's being done on Jesus's terms from the first verse.
I'm happy you mentioned that. Okay, so take it away, Roy. You're going exactly where I want to go with this.
It's like, yeah, we just understand. So if we read what was said, that Jesus went forth, but Judas knew where he was going. So Jesus led. Jesus picked the place and the time, and they were just coming after him when it was time. Well, we can go. That's a whole nother discussion point, but I'll let you lead. But it's an interesting thought because it starts with the word in John 1, and these words are being spoken in 18:1, and it's a kind of a riff to the end.
To explain to those who, and I'm tracking absolutely 100%.
I know you.
Yeah, but just to explain to those who may not be tracking us closely, Jesus spends a lot of time in the Garden of Gethsemane. This is not simply a drop off for 15 minutes in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. We are told that Jesus has spent an hour. Remember, he says, Peter, James, and John, could you not stay awake with me for 1 hour? Jesus is deliberately waiting around in the garden for Judas and the arresting party to show up. Jesus easily could have walked through the garden, past the Mount of Olives, made his way to Bethany if he wanted to. He is actually, as you're putting out, Roy, he's deliberately remaining there, awaiting for this confrontation to happen. And he's been signaling it all night that this is going to happen. The other interesting point I want to make, once again, I'm very big on this being an eyewitness account, and I think one of the elements that gives it away is John mentions they crossed the Kidron Valley. Has anyone here been to Israel? I have not, but I have family who live there.
I have. Yeah.
You have? Okay. Do you remember what's in the Kidron Valley?
You pass in the lowest point, right? And you pass in the valley of the shadow of death.
Mm-hmm. And
And then you ascend.
You ascend, and then buried in the Mount of Olives at that point usually are
Those who have predeceased waiting for to stand in their graves.
exactly. So if you're a Jewish person today in a Hasidic or Orthodox community, you might want to be buried on the Mount of Olives in prime real estate. Jewish individuals have been doing this, to my knowledge, at least for the past 2,000 years, maybe for 3,000. I don't know how far it goes back, because of the prophecies that the Messiah will come to the Mount of Olives and that there will be a massive bodily resurrection of the dead, which is fundamental to Jewish theology. So Jesus going to the cross to defeat death is theologically walking through the area where the Messiah himself is predicted to defeat it. So it's very, very, very poignant. We would miss it as American readers. A Jewish reader would instantly pick up on that and say, okay, there's something there. Other thoughts and reflections and ideas so far?
It's Sandy. When you said that the Jewish leaders would want this to be done out of the main public sphere, but you're saying that Jesus picked the site. Are you then saying that he chose to bring them out of the public sphere to meet him? Like, is that a both and?
It's a very good point, Sandy. I believe that Jesus understands that this is not going to be a rest in the temple courts. He says this very deliberately later. We're going to get to the passage where he's in front of Annas, the father-in-law of the current high priest. Rather than bringing them out into the public, what I would say, Jesus is trying to situate that even though he is about to be physically bound, quite literally put in a position of physical vulnerability, he's trying to demonstrate, like a good teacher, like a good rabbi, that he is actually in control. And this is something that we really see also in the other Gospels, where the high priests will say, particularly in Mark chapter 14, well, let's not arrest this guy in the public lest there be an uproar among the people. And it is Jesus who calls the shots, which makes Judas cut bait and run, as it were. When Jesus announces at the Last Supper, at the institution of the Eucharist, that one among the number will betray him, right? So it's from the entirety of the events leading up into this point, Jesus seems to be controlling the timing, which of course is fitting from a Christian theological perspective, obviously my theological perspective, that we're dealing with God in flesh, being in some sense fully and entirely presenting the redemptive arc of history in what he is doing. But does that answer your question, or do you have any other thought points or reflections?
Kind of. I was wondering if there was a reason that I could see the chief priests choosing to go themselves away from where they would be seen to be doing this. But I wondered if, and you maybe answered it, whether there was a motivation in Jesus himself to not make them do it in public.
Yeah, I believe that Jesus is trying to fulfill prophecy as well. And I believe that the garden is a specific place that he wants to emphasize for the reasons that Adam, I think, referred to earlier, going back to the Garden of Eden. Obviously, you know, it's hard to fully understand the mind of the divine Son of God, but from what we can gather here, the garden symbolism in this very real place, which we can visit to this day, is something which would not have been lost on some members of the high priest's inner circle here, who are certainly coming, particularly Malchus, who we are about to name. All right. How about we press on? I would love to continue to dig into this one. I want to make sure we actually get to the arrest part. All right. Take it away, Zeb.
Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out and asked them, "Who is it you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "I am he," Jesus said.
I want to emphasize that the word he is not there in the Greek.
Okay.
Jesus said, I am.
Oh.
All right, take it away, Sam.
And Judas the traitor was standing there with them. When Jesus said, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. Again he asked them, "Who is it you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they said. Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he. If you are looking for me, then let these men go." This happened so that the words he had spoken would be fulfilled. "I have not lost one of those you gave me." Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus commanded Peter, "Put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" Then the detachment of soldiers, with its commander and the Jewish officials, arrested Jesus. They bound him and brought him first to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jewish leaders that it would be good if one man died for the people.
Keep going, Sam, as we have a lot of ground to cover tonight.
Right.
Yep.
Simon Peter and another disciple were following Jesus. Because this disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard, but Peter had to wait outside at the door. The other disciple, who was known to the high priest, came back, spoke to the servant girl on duty there, and brought Peter in. "You aren't one of this man's disciples too, are you?" she asked Peter. He replied, "I am not." It was cold, and the servants and officials stood around a fire they had made to keep warm. Peter also was standing with them, warming himself.
All right, we'll stop right there. Immediate thoughts, reflections, and reactions.
I am.
Danielle, take it away for us. What does Jesus mean by invoking the divine name?
That he is God. I don't mean to step on toes here, but what he's saying is, yeah, I'm Yahweh. I am.
Don't worry, Danielle. We seminarians didn't step on toes. Jesus did that already. Yeah, Jesus is not mincing words here.
Yeah, he's called it out. He's calling his shot. He's saying exactly who he is. He's Yahweh. Yahweh is now man. He's one of us and taking on our sin, our sorrow, our shame, and our suffering.
I'm gonna throw something in. I don't know if you got how you guys. There's a nuance here, at least from what I'm seeing. When Jesus said, "I am he," they drew back and fell on the ground. For me, to be in the presence of God, when when heaven meets earth, earth buckles or bows down. And so my opinion is when he said, "I am," and when he goes, I am he, is pretty much like he's revealing, and I'm asking as well as saying, he's like, "Hi, I'm God," and then it's like wham,
Exactly.
they get
That's exactly the point he's making, and that's why they fall, because he's showing just a glimpse here of his divinity. And it's at his arrest, which is so striking, that here divinity is letting itself be taken by mortal, infinite humanity.
I like that. Yeah.
Amen. Amen.
It's interesting.
Sure.
So John obviously is the gospel, which starts right with first was the right, or in the beginning was the word, right? But like the idea of like the word being ultimate, like just like the powerful, like the bridge to the divine, right? And ultimately it's a word, right? Or it's a series of words, right, that reveals divinity, but also it's the word, right, which like shows Jesus' power and like makes everyone else like fall down, right? I think that's But the symbolism there is kind of interesting. But yeah.
I think you're onto something there, Adam. It's interesting to this day, the fact that Yod He Vav He is not normatively ever pronounced within Jewish circles. And it's curious that it's often substituted not just for Adonai, but also Hashem, the name. Right? That there's a sense of authority in the name. So much so, I believe that it's the Midrash about Lilith, the figure of dark infamy, who is described as being banished from Eden for many reasons, but among them for evoking the divine name with hostile intent. So there's this sense in which the very pronunciation of the divine name here by the author entering into the story changes the very fabric of reality. And you can see why the tackling to the ground, there are many reasons why this might take place. Are they wondering if there is going to be some dramatic affect upon them? Are they worried about being cursed in a sense? Is it because militarily, are they wondering, is this a signal for an action being set against them? Or quite frankly, and this is the reasoning that I find most comfortable, quite frankly, the reality that they are awed at the presence of the word walking among them.
Right.
You hear God in flesh declare, I am. At least for me, I would be on my face too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any
There are
other thoughts? Because things get spicy here. We have reference to Malchus. Curious about thoughts about that. References, of course, to Caiaphas, the high priest that year. I would love to dig into that with all of you. What about the disciple whom Jesus loved, aka John, being known to the high priest, letting Peter in? What are some thoughts, some ideas, some questions, some wrestling, or anything else here? Because it's a very juicy, very ripe text.
This account doesn't mention the healing of the ear, though.
The way Luke does in our gospel for this Sunday's reading. Yeah, it mentions that Luke heals Malchus's ear.
Mm-hmm. So not only do you have Jesus announcing his divinity, then you would also have a demonstration of his power and healing before all of the officials.
Right.
Why is it that Matthew, Mark, and Luke do not mention the name of Peter and do not mention the name of Malchus? Why does John actually name these people? Some reasons that we might have. It's all guesswork. I just have a guess I've read from other people far smarter than me. But there are many ways we could come at it. Why is it that John is the one who records the name of the servant of the high priest of all people here?
Maybe he was converted later on. You never know.
Yes. And if he's converted later on, if he's named by the author of this text, then what does that say about the community that John's writing to?
He may have become like a member of that certain community that John was writing to that's like saying, if you want to know what happened, ask him. He was standing right there.
Precisely, right? That Malchus here must be a colleague of the divine author. I believe it to be John, the son of Zebedee. I take the traditional view. And that Malchus's eyewitness testimony must have been very moving. So moving that it left an impact on...
Well, I mean, he got his ear cut off and then he got it popped down. That's impressive. I mean, that one, you get an automatic hall pass with that. I mean, and also he was an enemy. And from what I understand, if Peter were arrested for assaulting a guard of the temple, isn't that like a major felony?
Precisely why it has been argued, and I believe it to be true, the reason why Matthew, Mark, and Luke omit Peter's name with the cutting off of the ear. Because if Matthew, Mark, and Luke are being written at a time where these communities are still in Jerusalem, who could still go after Peter?
Wow, dude, crazy.
And I guess that also plays into Peter's denial.
Yes. He's panicking.
He's panicking because he could be up on the chopping block for having done that as well.
Oh, yeah.
What was the offense? What would happen to if you assaulted, like tried to kill one of the temple guards?
Oh, well, it's not
Capital
just
crime.
yeah, take it away. But yeah, it doesn't look good for the person who is
Yeah,
Right.
capital crime, because you just
Right.
you've threatened the house of God is what you've done.
Right.
So
Okay.
they're not just gonna let that go. Yeah, that would have been
Could Peter have gotten killed?
probably, from knowing what we know of Levitical and
Okay.
Deuteronomic law, yes.
Wow. Okay. And
Yep.
then you wound up with a convert.
Exactly.
Fun.
This encourages us to make really bombastic evangelical efforts. Just go out there and wound a bunch of people.
Hey, I'm in. Let's go. All right. I'm your guy.
Run roughshod over everybody.
Liking the way you're thinking. All right.
For any
Thanks,
FBI
John.
agents
I
watching.
in no way publicly endorse this in any way, shape, or form. Candidacy committee for ordination. However, on some days of the week, no. No, it's curious to me, right? How, once again, John's detail is very precise here. It's incredibly precise. And notice, what does Jesus say to Peter in this historical record, which is a little bit different. I think it's an extension of what Jesus says in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. You'll remember, what does Jesus famously say to Peter about the sword and the other gospels?
Those who live by the sword will die by it.
Yes. Lightsaber loving me as a child hated that verse.
Yeah.
But what does Jesus say here, curiously enough? Something that refers back to something that we don't hear in John.
Right. Put away your sword. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?
Shall I not drink
Because-
the cup my Father has given me?
Yeah.
Why
So
do you
it's bad.
think why do you think he says that here to Peter?
Peter's always trying to get it in the way of his divine, his calling. Peter's like, no, you'll never die, not with me around. Get behind me, Satan. And then Peter's picking up, he's doing it again. Trying to protect Jesus by might and force. Whereas Jesus is like, no, I'm here to be slaughtered, to be the lamb, to be the sacrifice.
Amen.
What do you think? Why is he mentioning it here again? Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?
Oh, I have tons of thoughts on this. I want to make sure I open the mic for anyone else who wants to run with it before I give my stab at it. Does anyone else want to take a stab at it before I give my crazy seminarian 2 cents? To be reviewed by my two fellow
I
seminarians?
think my guess is, once again, to what John said earlier in our study, Jesus had every opportunity to escape. Others alluded to the conversations that Jesus had in the Garden of Gethsemane with the Father and the drops of blood. Like, if he wanted to escape, he would have. So there's no need to fight off the attackers if he's surrendering to their will, right? Like, when Aslan is surrendering himself to the White Witch, he's not asking Susan and Lucy to pull out their daggers and fight for him, because he's already surrendering to the will of the deep magic.
Exactly, Ryan. And I would say C.S. Lewis here is a perfect analogy to be made. Because Aslan voluntarily submits himself to his will, of course, of his Father over the seed in fulfilling that plan. So the divine will, the voluntas, in that sense, the sovereignty of God. I would also add, I think there's a reason why John includes this memory as well, to clue us in. John is aware of the agony in the garden. A lot of people, once again, will try to draw a wedge between the agony in the garden and the high priestly prayer in the previous chapter. I think John is winking at the audience saying, yes, Jesus really did historically say this. He really did say this. He is declaring his submission to the Father's will. And by the way, this is also because he was in the garden wrestling. He was wrestling with principalities and powers, which I think illuminates something of the combat that was going on in that garden before spiritually. It's not with a sword of steel that the powers of the evil one are broken. It's broken by, as you eloquently and beautifully put it, Ryan, by the deeper magic, to quote C.S. Lewis, which in the Chronicles of Narnia is a reference really to the prophecy of the death and resurrection of the Messiah. Other thoughts, reflections before we move on? Why, and I know that among you, some will probably pick up on this. Why is it unusual and important that John here emphasizes that Caiaphas was high priest that year? And why is Jesus specifically taken to Annas?
Hierarchy.
See, also drawing a contrast between like how his reign is never ending. Meanwhile, Caiaphas is extremely short-lived, right? Presumably, you know, like ending within the year, right?
Very good.
Doesn't
Well,
it
if
have
it says,
so-
oh, sorry.
I think it has something to do with the Romans. I think the Romans had a regime change and they put in the priests that they wanted. And they chose to put Annas in place of his father or uncle or whatever he was, to be high priest. Isn't that right, John?
Oh, Ryan, you are totally tracking. I'm going to totally hop on that point in a complete second. So I totally agree. It has to do with the Romans and appointments, and it's a total dig at the system going on during the time period. So very right.
I'll let you run your study. Go.
No. I want you to run it, dude. We all run it together, man. We run it together. It's a benign form of collectivism. Please. And you, Abby, you had a point.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, isn't, priest, you are a high priest for life, right? And so, saying that year means that he's not going to be high priest next year. That maybe something unexplained will happen to him. You know,
Abby,
he will
aware.
he will experience an unexplained accident and be out of the picture.
Abby, you are very, very astute. Yet again, you picked up a lot on our Bible studies. That is awesome. Yeah. So to your point and to Ryan's point, yes, it is traditional according to the Levitical law that Daniel was referring to earlier, that the high priest is to remain in their office for
It's a lifetime.
yeah, and they are to be deposed under any circumstances.
No, they can only be their only way out is to die, and then their son has to take their place. So it's almost monarchical, but not.
Yeah,
It's
literally
a different form of it, sort of.
it is quasi-monarchical.
Monarchical, yeah.
I think you're right. Yeah. So as Ryan was referring to earlier, this got really messed up. I'm sure all of you can remember a time when there were not one but two popes. You had Benedict XVI who resigned, and you had Pope Francis at the same time, and the confusion that made in Roman Catholic circles.
Yeah.
It made for a rather busy time. Imagine the year of multiple people who had been technically high priests living at the same time within a Jewish context. I say this with utter reverence. With Israeli family, it really is an oy vey situation. Basically, as Ryan said, the Romans come in, they occupy Judea, and in order to prevent uprisings among the people, what they do is they commit a high form of blasphemy. They depose Annas, who was supposed to be high priest for life. They depose Annas. And instead, they have a rotating door of high priests year after year after year after year after year.
Oh, okay. So Hyphus is just the
He's just
priest
a
for that
stand-in for
particular
now.
year.
Yeah.
And what is his family relationship to Annas?
He's the
Brother-in-law, or sorry, father-in-law.
Annas is the father-in-law of.
Which means, although you have rotating doors of, in air quotes, high priests, who's still calling a shot within the family, mafia style?
Wait, but I thought they deposed Annas.
Oh, they deposed him.
They deposed him, technically speaking, but he's really the one in charge. He's really the one calling it all. Yeah.
Oh, so it wasn't like he was. Wait, so he was also installed by the Romans, but then deposed?
Yep, and he was soft retired, which means
Oh,
he's not
so it was a
really.
grab for power. He was basically installed, and then they decided, oh, well, we're gonna retire you, but it's okay. Your family is still going to benefit.
Oh,
Tell
more
me
conniving than that. I think Annas literally was, okay, so you can have my sons as high priest every year. And I have a son-in-law too while you're at it as well. Keeping it in the family.
meet the new boss, the same as the old boss.
Yes. To quote one of my favorite rock bands of all time, The Who. So here's the interesting thing. Does Annas get a reference in the trial of Jesus in Matthew, Mark, and Luke?
No.
No. Curiously enough, whenever you hear a skeptical argument that says, oh, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they're earlier sources, they give us a better idea of the politics that's on the ground. Oh, John is super, super late, which, by the way, is untrue. John is composed no later than by 8096, only 40 years after the events, which is nothing historically. Notice here, John's picking up on political cues that only someone living in Judea on the grounds is going to get.
Oh, okay.
Very specific. We know this because 2nd century forgeries don't have that precision that lines up with Flavius Josephus, other Jewish historians. So this is very nitty-gritty with the politics of the high priestly family. But there's a spiritual reading, and I think, Adam, was it you? I think you mentioned this, that Jesus's priesthood is forever, but Caiaphas' priesthood, nah. Caiaphas is a stand-in at best. So it's a reminder of who has the real authority here. Yeah, so very, very good points. Any other thoughts before we move on to the confrontation? And man, I have to skip over for time's sake how it is John who somehow is known to the high priest. I'm going to spoil it. That fishing business with the sons of Zebedee may have been a bit bigger than we can imagine. After all, they hired servants who were in the boat in Mark. Tells us that they may have been pretty influential. They may have known a few people.
Wait, so it was Jesus and his disciple John and then Peter who went?
I'm trying to follow your question, Abby.
So there were like 2 disciples who went with Jesus at this point, and it was John and Peter, right?
That's correct, right? And Peter tries to get in. He can't. John comes in because he's known to the high priest, apparently.
But he doesn't say, I went. He says the other disciple went.
Well, that's the thing when you read John's gospel is he never identifies himself directly.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Wait,
Okay,
so
let's see over
why?
here.
It's interesting. He identifies everybody else, but why doesn't he identify himself?
Good question. Okay, my peeps, before I jump on this, take it away.
Sorry.
This
I
is
know
good.
that
This
this
is
is
good.
like. I know that you want to continue with the. It's just a thing. You just said he never identifies himself, and I'm like, wait, but he
Well-
identifies everybody else.
To God goes the glory, and also, what was it about bearing witness for yourself?
Right.
Hmm.
And other thoughts as well?
John's identified by his actions of endearment,
Mhm.
not by his namesake.
Mm.
He feels that's a stronger tie to him, right?
And the name he uses for himself is the disciple that Jesus loved, meaning that we know that he was part of his inner circle, but he's not. That's all he's giving us, and we just have to know that it's him.
No.
I mean, I like you, John, believe in the tradition that the son of Zebedee wrote John. So
And what I'd say is the chain of custody is strong, right? Because John
yeah,
behind students like Polycarp, who leave behind
Polycarp,
students.
right, in the later 2nd century. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's also a matter of safety. It's if they were being persecuted, are you going to put your name on the document?
Right.
That's a fair point.
Yeah.
And there's
I mean, look what
actually,
happened. He ended up on Patmos. So yeah, I could.
you don't want to be, you might have survived being boiled in oil. So you might want to, if you're on Patmos, you might want to preserve the document,
But
yeah,
then, like, wouldn't everybody else he named be persecuted too, or was it long enough after that he just was like, oh well, I'm the only one still alive, so I guess I
Exactly.
won't
That's
name
exactly what
myself.
happens. Most of the
Mhm.
most of the apostles are gone by now,
Mhm.
and tradition holds that he is the last living apostle.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. All right,
Yeah.
continue.
and I also want to add here, historically, how common is it within the 1st century AD and a bit earlier for people to write autobiographies in the first person? I did this, I did that. Is anyone familiar with Julius Caesar's autobiography called the Gallic Wars or Gallic Wars?
Yeah.
Right.
He doesn't really write. It's written like years after the fact by, I want to say, Tacitus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But even in some of those sources, right?
Right.
Even in other sources that we can attribute to Julius Caesar, he never really refers to himself
in the first person. I think the first time I read that in the first person was, I think, Augustine in his Confessions. If you're familiar with that.
Oh yeah, no,
and that's not written till like the 4th and 5th centuries.
Yeah,
Interesting.
so the writing custom in the ancient world was not really to say I did this or I did that, even if you're the autobiographer, which is
Interesting.
curious,
Okay. All right. I did not know that.
Yeah.
No, most people don't actually, and you're right. Augustine, one of my all-time favorite saints of all time, by the way. I love Augustine. I am totally an Augustine fanboy. Augustine is said to create the template for the modern biography by going, well, this is where I was born, and this is what happened to me, and then I fell away, and then I came back, and then I have these reflections at the end theologic. The very thought that he's introspective is also unusual, right? So it's very very rare for a text to get into the psychology of how someone's feeling or thinking necessarily. It's often expressed in a different plane or different way.
Right, because Ryan and I, we read it together when we took classics of personal devotions together, and I remember our professor mentioned it. Like the whole thing with Augustine is he's writing his confessions as a prayer. It's just one long giant prayer, if you read it that way.
And filled with that acknowledgement, as we proceed here with Jesus and Annas, it's interesting to me the way in which language of prayer in the passage we're about to read, like Augustine, very similar to Augustine, is also seen as a form of spiritual warfare combat. That it's not just Augustine who has made personal sins, but Augustine says he participates in original sin with the theft of
with the pear incident. Yeah.
Like the theft of the pears is his participation in Adam and Eve, just as Jesus versus Annas here is very much Jesus confronting really a darker, more malevolent power. Certainly in the way in which it is framed, and I think it really did historically occur. All right, Sam, take it away.
Right. Himself. All right. Verse 19. Meanwhile, the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching.
Notice, how do they refer to Annas? Who's still in charge, man? I'm just saying, it's like, okay, keep going, Sam.
I have spoken openly to the world, Jesus replied. I always taught in synagogues or at the temple, where all the Jews come together. I said nothing in secret. Why question me? Ask those who heard me. Surely they know what I said.
And I just want to emphasize for those who might not know, when it says the Jews, we all know, of course, the author of this text is Jewish, right? Written primarily, possibly even to not just Gentiles, but also to Jewish believers as well. So the term refers to the leadership in Judea at this time. In the first century, it had a more restrictive meaning to both the leadership and the geography. It is certainly not with the later connotations that come with the regrettable anti-Semitism of the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and all medieval era, of course, as well. All right, take it away, Sam. So Jesus is saying, I taught in the temple. Ask my people who heard me.
When Jesus said this, one of the officials nearby slapped him in the face. Is this the way you answer the high priest? He demanded. If I said something wrong, Jesus replied, testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why did you strike me?
Burn. Burn.
Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest.
Thoughts about this interaction?
I think it's the best example of courage and boldness. Just because Jesus calls them out. Like, if I've done something wrong, tell me. If not, why'd you hit me? I'm like, wow, that's just amazing.
32 p.m. 4 notifications. Canvas student group.
But yeah, no, I think it points out Jesus is in control here, right? Jesus is struck, he's wounded, but who gets the last word in this exchange?
Well, of course, Jesus, but isn't it fascinating? God would allow himself to get struck in the face by his own creation, right?
What's the famous phrase that I think one of the great apologists of Christianity made in the 20th century? The loving Father has opened his arms so wide so that the angry militant atheist could climb on his lap to slap him in the face.
Well, so the lover may stoop to conquer. Yes, that sort of thing. It's like it's like when someone enacts violence upon you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's unjustified. It makes them look bad no matter what your reaction is. And I think this is the thing that inspired Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi and nonviolent resistance throughout since Jesus, actually. And they would point to passages like this where it's like, wow, you got struck. Why don't you fight back? Fight violence with violence.
9:33 p.m. 5 notifications. Canvas student.
But yeah, no, I would agree. I would agree with you, with you, Brandon, that legitimately what we're seeing here is an example of perfect nonviolence. The creator of the universe could snap his fingers and snuff Annas out of existence.
I think he's making a mockery of everyone there, and they don't even know it. Because if you're charged with an offense, you need to have 2 witnesses to be present, right? and they don't have any witnesses. And that's why he's saying, go ask the people that heard me. You're accusing me of something and you don't have anyone there to validate and to verify. And you strike me because of that. You're not following your own ordinances.
Mm.
And the fact that the trial is also happening at night is also against their law as well.
At night during a holy
And during a holy, yeah,
day. Yeah.
day, yeah.
So I think I think he's making they're so enraged by him that they're being hypocrites to their own due process. I could be wrong.
No, no, you're right. And actually, it's even more shocking here. John gives us a glimpse. This is before Jesus is even sent to Caiaphas, which tells you Annas has already determined the outcome. He has already called the shots. He just wants the pregame meeting as much as possible. So Jesus of Nazareth is subjected to an illegal series of trials, probably plural, at night, along with physical duress, along with, of course, multiple interrogations, which are against the Hebrew law of having 2 or 3 eyewitnesses to establish a single word. Other thoughts? Any other reflections?
There's one observation I just want to paint out. Jesus has a lot of, moments of dialogue here. And also intimate moments, healing the man's ear. It's the mob mentality around him that seems deaf to these words of truth and these revelations of hypocrisy. But it's these individual moments that seem as though anyone who tries to condemn Christ is, if they're not completely oblivious, they are shown a mirror of their own hypocrisy. They are made fools by the truth itself. And I like the thought experiment of playing with, we don't know truly what it's like to exist inside Christ's mind, but, I'm sure the man who struck him, I'm sure that the capacity of Christ's love for the person who's striking him is, we don't know if he has some sort of cognizant idea of the soul as somebody who was once a child, once a boy, was once born, was once, and was nursed and then had to grow up into the man that they are. This person, the capacity of Christ's love, even for the people who are swarming him here, it's you can only imagine, right?
The reality that Jesus is capable of reading the thoughts of the very child who has struck him. He has come to save and rescue and redeem the very one who is striking him.
There's another similar parallel running, but it's a little bit tangent, but it's parallel. It's a good one.
Okay.
So in the garden, we have one of Jesus's officers take out and strike a priest's aide, right? And Jesus makes it right. Here, we're kind of flipping the script a little bit, and we have one of the priestly soldiers striking Jesus. Obviously, we just proved it wrong in several different ways, but the priests here don't make it right.
That's a good point. When Peter, one of Jesus's disciples, harms another man, an attacker, Jesus rebukes the violence and undoes the violence with healing. Mm-hmm. When the high priest and the servant evoke violence, it is not undone with a word of generosity or healing or reconciliation. Pretty wild. Excellent point. All right, well, let's continue to take it away as we're...
6 notifications.
All right.
Group. Now. Canvas.
Meanwhile, Simon Peter was still standing there warming himself. So they asked him, "You aren't one of his disciples too, are you?" He denied it, saying, I am not. One of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, challenged him.
Oh,
Didn't I see you with him in the garden? Again, Peter denied it, and at that moment a rooster began to crow. Then the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, they did not enter the palace, because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked, What charges are you bringing against this man? If he were not a criminal, they replied, we would not have handed him over to you. Pilate said, Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law. But we have no right to execute anyone, they objected. This took place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, Are you the king of the Jews? Is that your own idea, Jesus asked, or did others talk to you about me? Am I a Jew? Pilate replied. Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you have done? Jesus said, My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place. You are a king then, said Pilate. Jesus answered, You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. What is truth? Retorted Pilate. With this, he went out again to the Jews gathered there and said, I find no basis for a charge against him, but it is your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at the time of the Passover. Do you want me to release the king of the Jews? They shouted back, No, not him. Give us Barabbas. Now Barabbas had taken part in an uprising. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! And they slapped him in the face. Once more Pilate came out and said to the Jews gathered there, Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him. When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, Here is the man. As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, Crucify! Crucify! But Pilate answered, You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him. The Jewish leaders insisted, We have a law, and according to that law he must die because he claimed to be the Son of God. When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid, and he went back inside the palace. Where do you come from? He asked Jesus. But Jesus gave him no answer. Do you refuse to speak to me? Pilate said. Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you? Jesus answered, You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin. From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jewish leaders kept shouting, If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar. When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat at a place known as the Stone Pavement, which in Aramaic is Gabbatha. It was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about noon. Here is your king, Pilate said to the Jews. But they shouted, Take him away! Take him away! Crucify him! Shall I crucify your king? Pilate asked. We have no king but Caesar, the chief priests answered. Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified.
Quid est veritas? What is truth. What do we feel about the interactions with Pilate? Of course, I had weeks I would love to go literally beat by beat by beat. But this episode with Pilate, what immediately sticks out to us? Some of us who grew up Roman Catholic may remember an alternative translation of "Here is the man," in Latin, "Ecce homo," behold the man, which has massive implications in terms of Christ being the new Adam. What are some thoughts that immediately come out to us about this passage? Things that strike us as unusual or different or odd or strange or a fascination?
It's funny, I don't remember Pilate like trying so many times to free Jesus.
Ooh, other thoughts? Why this might be the case? How this is the case?
So
I was struck by how many times Pilate declares that this man is innocent.
Mhm.
And
Very
that
much so. Very much so.
it's a beautiful deception by Satan, right? The goal of Jesus is to the cross, and he is trying to get him away from that cross. It is perfect. It's a wonderful deception. It plays on the humanity. Why do you need to do it this way? You don't have to.
Other readings?
We have no king but Caesar.
Ouch.
Yeah,
Why is that blasphemy from the lips of the high priests?
they just disowned God. They just said no to Yahweh. Yahweh literally in the flesh. And they just said, we have no king but Caesar.
Especially when Caesar claims to
Be a god.
a god.
On his
It's like
coinage, Deus
it's
Filius, Son of
it's
God.
just it's just interesting that because these are Jewish people, they're just going along with the Romans. They it seems like they have kind of washed their hands of the issue and they're just like, well, you take care of him. He's your problem now.
Wasn't this also like right after the Maccabean revolt, if I'm getting my history correct? Right. So wouldn't these like
About 100 years after, 160 years after.
oh okay. So
So yeah.
just in time afterwards.
I have a question for everyone. Who is actually doing the will of the Lord? Don't get fooled by the shell game, right? This is the guy in the corner playing follow the queen, follow the queen. Who's doing the will? Pilate or the priests?
Any
That is a
other?
really, really excellent inversion of the story. Oh my gosh, that's so cool.
Yeah, take it away. And if anyone wants to take reflections on that.
Wait, so like what you said, Roy, is that the goal was to get Jesus to die on the cross. And so wouldn't it be the priests?
And who's appearing? Who appears to be the rational one?
Pilate.
Interesting. We have a lot of juxtapositions.
Mhm.
But it also just goes to show that God's will be done. That even if we try to force our own will of, I'll just let him off because I don't want this to turn into a big thing. I don't want to crucify an innocent man. Is that Pilate doesn't have the power to do that.
It's a very deep offsetting play of power between them. See, the goal is you got to put Jesus on the cross. That's his purpose. We could debate, we could have another discussion. John tracks with me on what and why and purpose. And he's not coming as a king. But
Well, is
Pilate's trying to say, come on, man, he's innocent. You don't have to go there. Doesn't that sound like somebody in a desert?
I think what's very interesting to me is every Jewish table prayer refers to God as the Melech HaOlam. So if I was blessing bread, I would use this formula, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu, melech haolam, chamotzi lachem min haaretz, which is literally, I'm not going to do a chosen Jonathan Rumi impersonation, but the words would be, and those Episcopalians, Anglicans, and some Lutherans will have it in our Lutheran liturgy sometimes, and definitely in the Roman Catholic Mass, you'll recognize the words. Blessed are you, Lord God, King of the universe, who brings forth the bread of the earth, our work of human hands, that it may become for us our spiritual food. Blessed be God forever. Right? So the thing about it is, Jesus is identified as the Melech HaOlam, the King of Eternity. And he's made that very clear, that he is a Melech. He is not just a Melech, he is Ha-Melech. He's the King, right? And to your point, Danielle, which is very powerful, the high priests are choosing not Jesus, the divine Son of God. They're choosing Caesar, the blasphemous pagan emperor, Deus Filius, literally, Son of God, on the coinage instead, which is pretty mind-boggling how things are kind of tipped upside down. But that's how much they hate and loathe the idea of Jesus of Nazareth, which is, once again, the irrational hatred of the mob. How we interpret that, whether we take Roy's interpretation or whether you take another interpretation, you see here something empowering.
Not mine. It's a group debate.
No,
That's not mine.
No, Roy. All of my interpretations are neither my interpretations. You and I have read them and heard them from other lore masters as well. Don't worry about it. By all means, it's good. It's very good.
If you think about it, I mean, the high priests are doing what the Jewish people have always, if you think about it throughout their history, have always done, and that's reject God, whether it's, after breaking the covenant of Sinai, like within 5 minutes, or, getting literally to the border of the promised land and going, yeah, there are too many giants. We can't do it. Can we go? We're going back. Sorry.
And I will openly say that I preached on Palm Sunday the fact that the institutional body of Christ, the church, has done the same thing to the martyrs with John Wycliffe, with William Tyndale, with Joan of Arc, with Martin Luther being excommunicated and threatened with death, right? Thomas Becket, right? Where Thomas More is my favorite example because he would have burnt me on the stake, but I love Thomas More. I love Thomas More. I am the king's good and loyal servant, but I am God's first. Right? If there's one thing that we know about whether it's Henry VIII, whether it's the Holy Father in Rome, whether it is an individual French council of clerics at Rouen, the story of the Pharisees not getting Jesus is relived again and again and again in the life of the people of God, whether it's the Hebrew prophets being martyred, or whether it's the prophets of the New Covenant being martyred. It's retold. But you're right. I mean, Danielle, Mount Sinai, perfect example. Moses is still on the mountain, and they're building a golden calf, literally.
Yeah, I mean, and it's like, you're no friend of the emperor. I mean, you got to kill this guy because we just want him dead because we don't like him. So yeah, it just always seems to work out that way. And you see that when you read the prophets like Ezekiel depicting God as this, this husband who's, on him. And just in the graphic detail he goes into with that, which I won't go into here, but it's this, dare I say, like beautiful, haunting picture of that. And you see the same thing in Hosea as well.
I would love to go into the passage, had I the time, in Hosea, of the fact that Gomer, the wife who's run away and involved herself in not PG-13 related activities,
Exactly,
is about to be sold on the auction block and is redeemed by a husband who she has jilted, and basically disposes wealth, reputation, honor, all for her. And we were about to see this here, that same interchange with bridegroom and bride language, I think, with the image of the crucifixion. So, Sam, take us away with the last bit of our narrative for tonight, which is the offering that Christ willingly makes on the cross. And guys, I love all this too. And I love the plurality of approaches. It's good.
So the soldiers took charge of Jesus. Carrying his own cross, he went out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on each side, and Jesus in the middle. Pilate had a notice prepared and fastened to the cross. It read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Many of the Jews read this sign, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and the sign was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. The chief priests of the Jews protested to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews, but that this man claimed to be King of the Jews." Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." When the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his clothes, dividing them into 4 shares, one for each of them, with the undergarment remaining. This garment was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. "Let's not tear it," they said to one another. "Let's decide by lot who will get it." This happened that the scripture might be fulfilled that said, "They divided my clothes among them and cast lots for my garment." So this is what the soldiers did. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, "Woman, here is your son," and to the disciple, "Here is your mother." From that time on, this disciple took her into his home. Later, knowing that everything had now been finished, and so that scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said, "I am thirsty." A jar of wine vinegar was there, so they soaked a sponge in it, put the sponge on a stalk of the hyssop plant, and lifted it to Jesus' lips. When he had received the drink, Jesus said, "It is finished." With that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Now it was the day of preparation, and the next day was to be a special Sabbath. Because the Jewish leaders did not want the bodies left on the crosses during the Sabbath, they asked Pilate to have the legs broken and the bodies taken down. The soldiers therefore came and broke the legs of the first man who had been crucified with Jesus, and then those of the other. But when they came to Jesus and found that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced Jesus' side with a spear, bringing a sudden flow of blood and water. The man who saw it has given testimony, and his testimony is true. He knows that he tells the truth, and he testifies so that you also may believe. These things happened so that the scripture would be fulfilled. Not one of his bones will be broken, and, as another scripture says, they will look on the one they have pierced.
All right. Well, there's a lot of material here that I would love to spend 9 hours on. But what,
As the clock tolls.
As the clock tolls, very loudly here. Tell us, though, what has stuck out to you concerning these passages about the crucifixion from John's point of view? Notice what John doesn't include from Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and notice what John chooses to include that's unique here. What is sticking out to you?
I think the dividing clothing into lots, but also the specific focus on the undergarment, which I think is curious. I really want to get everyone's take on that because I have no idea what to make of it. I mean, one kind of initial gut reaction is that it's Jesus turning back into Adam, right? It's like literally stripping naked to recreate, what the first man, like the
There's
visage of the
that,
first man.
and there's
Um,
David as well in Psalm 22. They cast lots for my clothing.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I actually had an interesting thought about it. That's usually with grief, the tradition is that you rip your garment, you rip your clothing as a sign of your grieving. So this is kind of a reversal of that.
I'm going to riff on all this. I am deliberately biting my tongue. I am so excited to hop on this question. Right on, Adam. Right on. Other thoughts on this?
The sky doesn't go dark like in the synoptic gospels. There's no, like, nature is not giving any sign.
John is focusing on the fulfillment of the word.
Evangelism. Oh, evangelism.
Ooh.
Yeah,
The-
there's not like any like
I'll see
I
you
mean
in
in this
paradise.
well, he doesn't say do not judge them for they do know not what they do. About the other
Yeah, I thought the hyssop as well was interesting, being that it's Passover this week.
Yeah. The hyssop branch is the one that
hyssop
applies the
branch.
blood. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting that even though Jesus was dead, he still bled.
Water and blood, right?
Yeah.
So I'll just quickly offer a side note on that before I go back to Adam's question about the garment. Yeah, we medically know that if there's been heart failure and an individual dies and their heart is pierced, it will actually, from trauma, excrete what looks like water, but is actually a clear fluid. So John is.
Oh yeah, because blood is like, because at that point blood is blue, that's coming out, because it's not red anymore.
And are there any Catholic voices here who will remember devotions to blood and water from the heart of Christ? Sam, you know the answer. You could give it. You could go for it. There is a particular devotion out of Poland called the Divine Mercy Image, where blood and water and light rays are emerging from the heart of Christ. Because
Look, I've got the visual right here.
so this is a popular icon depicting the blood and water out of Poland, a sign of healing, right? Because water is a sign of purification coming from the right side of the temple in Ezekiel, right? So there's a sense in which, if you look at the Shroud of Turin, the wound is on the right side, curiously enough, as well, implying a fulfillment of Zechariah's prophecy and Ezekiel's. They will also look on me when they pierced. All right, back to Adam's question. The garments. Roy, are you aware of any garments that were seamless in Levitical law?
I think there might be a shroud.
Not just a shroud, Levitical law for a specific
The
liturgical function.
theses, I don't know the name. I can picture them in my mind, John.
So I once again, I've only read this elsewhere, but it seems to be a keton, which I believe to be a priestly liturgical garment.
Yeah, like something the high priest would wear, that he was like
a poncho-ish.
No, Danielle, you're right. Like it's something the high priest would wear, right? Like the priestly linen.
Yeah, like a vest. I would probably describe that, like an undergarment, like underneath his vest.
So, for example, I'm not wearing it right now because I ran out of the shower after having the allergy attack. But I'll be wearing sometimes a small garment called a scapular over my shoulders, which is an attempt at imitating the prophetic mantle, right? And of course, if I was wearing full, like a white alb as a part of my vestments as a seminarian, I'd be imitating something similar. This is a liturgical vestment that Jesus has. Sacred tradition says Mary gave it to him. Remember, Mary's cousin is Elizabeth, so it's not far-fetched that there may have been some Levitical connection there.
Mhm.
But what we do know historically is that this garment is a sign of, I would say, his divinity that is not cut. The divinity is not cut. But what is cut to ribbons? His outer garments, a sign of his
Mhm.
humanity. It's about to
Mm.
be offered. And notice how many pieces is it cut into?
Well, he has like four. Well, it's not. They don't cut it. They um they decide not to, right? Because so wait, they divide his outer clothes. It doesn't mean they cut it, does it?
Regrettably for Roman centurions, the treatment of the belongings, which would be valuables, was not necessarily tender. So,
Mhm.
yeah,
So it wasn't like there were four soldiers and they each took a piece of his clothing necessarily.
I would say they tried to tear the other garments into four pieces, and
Oh,
they
okay.
and they couldn't tear this one without it losing all of its value.
Got
Basically.
it.
Probably because it probably couldn't easily be torn as well. If you've ever tried to tear linen, don't ask me how I know this. I was a mischievous teenage boy once upon a time. It's actually very kind of hard to do it if it's very, very thick. So yeah, no, it's interesting to me that there's a sense of the humanity being cut, but the divinity being uncut. So there's a real religious reason, right, liturgically, that he has this. But Adam here is right about, well, the original Adam, right? Jesus is becoming Adam. He's being rendered naked. Remember, I forget which station of the 14 stations of the cross is the stripping of Jesus's garments. Do you think that felt all that great at the time, given how the clothing probably adhesed to his flesh after the scourging and the beating? Ever rip off a Band-Aid that's been on for a long
Yeah, it
Ugh,
hurts.
ow.
Yeah.
It would have been painful. I mean, he
Mhm.
was like bleeding probably at that point, and so his clothes were stuck to him, with the blood, and especially if you have open cuts. And like the other thing that I noticed is that they, um, in John, there wasn't anything about them pouring wine on him, like pouring, you know, salt in the wound, kind of.
Yeah, it's interesting, right, that Jesus actually, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, I believe that the eyewitness testimony of the people there was focused on a lot of the cosmic details of the darkness, the veil of the temple being torn from top to bottom, an earthquake, even in Matthew, a reference to an appearance of even members of the prophetic community coming back from the dead, which is fascinating if we want to do a deep dive there, how they prophesied in the village. Um, and yet, John chooses more intimate details.
Mhm.
Son, behold your mother. Woman, behold your son. I thirst. It is finished. Intimate details.
Mhm.
If I had 4 more hours, I'd like to tease out why that might be with all of you. I'm just going to cut to the answer that at least I find most compelling. In Mark's gospel, we're told that there were eyewitnesses who stood afar off. They would have heard Jesus shout, my God, why have you abandoned me? Maybe not these more intimate sayings. John, Mary Magdalene, Mary, the wife of Cleopas, and Mary Magdalene. Mary is the most common name in the first century AD. They are right under the cross. They are very, very close. They are able to hear and see the things that others cannot 10, 12, 14, 100 feet away. So John is filling in the gaps here. And of course, John's relationship with Mary is definitely going to change from this point on. Thoughts about that? Just since we're in a very ecumenical space, how do we feel about woman behold your son behold your mother, in light of just the Jewish context that we're talking about? Any theological implications we might want to take away from it?
He doesn't want his mom to be in shame, right? To be left to the destitute of like widows and orphans.
Very good. So there's concern for his mother in this moment.
And it's almost a priestly kind of thing.
I think it goes beyond priestly. I think that Jesus is giving a sermon from the cross, and that's massive.
Good point.
Yeah. Other thoughts? Other thoughts?
I know in the Catholic tradition, that's why Mary has now become like the mother of all who would believe, almost like a new Eve, if I'm not mistaken, just as Jesus is the second Adam.
Yeah. Irenaeus of Lyon, the disciple of Polycarp, the disciple of John the Apostle, who kept the Virgin Mary in his home in Ephesus, where Samantha went and visited, actually, says that whereas the no of Eve wrought ruin on the world, the yes of Mary, referring to the Annunciation and its aftermath, undoes the effects of the fall. So it's very old theology. It goes right back to the apostolic era and tradition. I just want to add here, it's not just the Roman Catholic Church that would acknowledge this as Mary as being uniquely in a maternal role to the church. Martin Luther repeatedly in his homilies refers to Mary as Mother of Christians.
So why do you think, just on a kind of quick side note, why do you think they got lost in Protestant tradition? Now it's like, it's too Catholic. How dare you mention Mary?
Yeah, it's curious, right? Because
yeah,
I would like to get other people's take on it too. But for me, if you look at John chapter 2 with Mary at Cana of Galilee, who is the one who asks Jesus to turn water into wine?
his mommy, his mom.
But the counterpoint
before we go into the next point, I want to hear your response, Roy, too. And just to complete my argument here, in Jewish culture, who is the queen in Israel? Is it the wife or the mother of the king?
Mother?
Yeah, the mother of the king.
Right, because usually how many wives does the king have?
Multiple.
A lot.
Right. So we see in 1 Kings chapter 1 how at least Bathsheba has an intercessory role, right? She's taking requests to Solomon. In that text, does Solomon always listen to what his mommy asks?
No, I'm assuming.
No. In fact, the dude who asked the request gets killed like 3 verses later. But it's interesting, right? That this idea of intercessor in the text is a very Jewish idea of the Queen Mother. But I want to get your take, Roy.
The next line of that verse, and I'm not a Bible thumper quoter, but is do whatever he says.
That's the whole point.
And that's the last line that I believe it's ever mentioned about Mary in the Bible.
In fact, the number one thing that Mary is noted for doing as the Queen Mother in Jewish court theology is she could bring a petition in to Jesus. Remember, Jesus is calling the shots. Jesus is Lord. You know, she's not elevated to some kind of degree that would counteract that. That's why she says, like, do whatever he tells you. No, that's not Bible thumping. That's just good theology, right? That's very, very good theology.
And I don't like in this conversation, if we had a couple of drinks, we could, all meet up and draw out a discussion,
Yeah. Well, I just want to point out where this theology comes from, right? Like,
yeah.
What it comes from a Jewish context, not from Rome, not from
Rome was the whole Catholicism thing. We know that.
Yeah, no,
but establish it.
Yeah, no, but it's curious, like within a Jewish culture, right?
Yes.
Mary here is depicted as if Jesus is the king, if he's the Melech HaOlam, she's in the Queen Mother in some kind of role here. And the text definitely has a very elevated.
I would say the traditional Jewish culture kind of reminds me of Ruth, that without a husband, the women were lost.
Yeah, I think it's a bit more important for Mary in light of First Kings chapter 1, where
but I don't, I'm not a,
yeah, no,
I'm
no.
not a master on that. I'm far from that.
Michael Heiser makes this point, by the way, interestingly enough, and he's no
Yeah,
I'm more Catholic than Michael Heiser. Let's put it that way. But yeah, no. Why was that lost, Danielle? That's a really good question. I personally think fundamentally it is a hyper allergic reaction to late medieval piety towards Mary.
Mhm.
I think it's an overcorrection that occurs, and then I think it's actually ingrained. Basically the fears for idolatry were legitimate concerns within the 15th, 16th century polemics, right? But you get to a point where even her role in the
14 p.m. 7
even her role in the incarnation, the word becoming
Now,
flesh,
Disney Music.
is just utterly, let's say there are some Baptist circles that will not even call her Mother of God, which Luther.
That's going. Yeah, it's going a bit too far. I mean, she
Well,
is.
it's the heresy of Nestorianism, then, right?
Right.
Denying, yeah. So, it's an element where we've overcorrected to the point of what is essentially heresy, and Luther makes it very clear. Calvin, interestingly enough, makes it very clear. The original Protestant reformers believed also too in traditions not contained in Scripture, such as the bodily assumption, perpetual virginity. Luther even believed in her being conceived without original sin too, by the way, which is a whole other can of worms, right? So I just want to point out here, I'm not saying we have to believe those things, but I think it's curious, as someone who's very sympathetic to that worldview, as all of you know, that here in the text, John is including a very tender moment here, which has a lot of theological significance, no matter which way we want to take it, right? Any other thoughts on that before we go and conclude on the it is finished bit?
That was well said, John. That was well said.
Yeah, no, I talk about a thorny topic, but I love it. That's why I do this.
Mhm.
Any other thoughts before we go on to it is finished, paid in full?
I think as an Anglican, I think that's something I can embrace as Mary, as or someone who's hopes to be ordained in the Anglican Communion.
I think it's one of the coolest things about being Anglican. You get to be both Catholic and Protestant at the same time.
Yeah.
I will be joining after ordination what's called the Society of the Holy Trinity, which is the closest thing you get to the Anglo-Catholics within the Lutheran tradition, just so I can get away with saying my rosary beads without being brought up on charges of heresy. So I'm not the only one. Look at if someone wants to Google my mentor, Father Wiki Barnes in Pennsylvania. Who's very, very much tracking and very similar elements. All right. I thirst. Remember something that Jesus said the night of the Last Supper, I shall not drink again with you, the fruit of the vine, until I drink anew with you in my Father's kingdom.
Mhm.
Did Jesus break his own words here? Or is he entering into the glory of his kingdom? What is going on?
Because that would be the fourth wine cup for Passover.
I love you. I didn't even prime you for that. This is why my wife is definitely already a deacon. Explain as you would to a child. For those who don't know, that's a reference to Galaxy Quest with Tim Allen. Sam, at the Passover, there are how many cups?
4.
Okay, and Jesus did what with cup number 3?
Well, that's when he went through the whole, this is my blood given for you.
Did he drink cup number 4? No.
No, right?
So when does Jesus drink the 4th cup, then, according to John? Which means the sacrifice begins when? like before the foundations of the world, but
World, yeah.
in time,
Mhm.
like within time. When does the offering begin?
On the cross, as he offers himself.
But if he's only finishing the fourth cup on the cross,
You could argue in the garden, as some
oh,
have.
does anyone think it could begin earlier than the garden?
I think it could be later than the garden, right? I understand the cups as sanctification. Excuse me. Then, yeah, sanctification, deliverance, redemption, glorification, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we have Elijah. I could be wrong.
No.
But
You're tracking. You're tracking here.
so we have
And
sanctification, we have deliverance. The cup of redemption was performed on the cross at the Last Supper.
but more literally, if Jesus drinks his last cup on the cross, when did he literally, concretely drink the first cup?
Literally drank the first cup.
Where did he literally drink the first cup?
At the wedding banquet?
No, for the Passover, for the Pesach.
The Last Supper.
We're celebrating it tomorrow night. Monday, Thursday, anyone? Last Supper, right? So, in other words, the Eucharistic offering, Luther never forbid the language of sacrifice, just wanted a clarification of what the word sacrifice meant, right? The sacrifice of Jesus deliberately is being initiated, not with the moment the nails go in his wrists, but actually with the first cup of the Pesach. And it seemingly concludes, by logical deduction, with this, at least ritually, I mean, it began before the beginning of time, right? But ritually, it seemingly concluded here with, I thirst, deliberately. And this is not my argument, it's actually Scott Hahn's point in his book, The Lamb's Supper, and Brand Petrie as well, from Notre Dame, where this is all Passover language. That's why the wine is brought up to his lips on what plant?
The hyssop plant
Which traditionally does what during the Passover?
marks the top and the posts with blood of the lamb.
So once again, what I would say is, and I'm not trying to throw stones at any other traditions, right? But for me, I'm coming at a very lower C Catholic Lutheran view of the sacraments, almost an Anglican view of the sacraments, right? Which believes in real presence, body, blood, soul, and divinity. It's very clear this is not only a memorialist act in a sense, but what begins the night before is concluded on the cross in some very powerful and palpable way. Why is tonight unlike any other night? Because on this night, the God of my fathers led me out of the house of bondage in the land of Egypt to freedom. Once we were slaves, now we are free. It's as if a Haggadah is being established here, the ritual for Passover. So real presence seems to be implicated here. But what thoughts do we have? What reactions to the "it is accomplished" bit here? Or even personally, what that means for us too.
That's a mystery. That's a real deep mystery.
Well, when you see the words "it is finished," what does that personally mean for you?
Forgiveness, debts paid, sanctification, justification, all of that, glorification.
His purpose as a human sacrifice and his time spent with people. He had duality and purpose, right? He was a teacher and a offering.
God and King and sacrifice. I'm not going to sing the Christmas hymn, but I want to.
But I don't know. I'm not.
Oh no, you know, Roy. You'll be beginning the same semester Sam is this fall. I cannot wait for you to be in the same classes.
Are we really? That
Oh
would
no, it's
be.
gonna happen.
I want to be your teammate. She can help me.
Both of you could team up together. I'll have to have
What would
someone
it be?
walk me. I'm so much of a puppy. Yeah, no, I just want to point out here that the words "it is finished" points always back to the Garden of Eden, what Adam was saying earlier, right? The undoing of the debt of original sin, the passing over of the angel of death is really accomplished here. To quote the Orthodox hymn, Christ is risen from the dead, trampling down death by death, and upon those in the tombs he is bestowing life. It's definitely a sense in which John here is getting the intimate details that Matthew, Mark, and Luke get in terms of the wide shot. I'd say Matthew, Mark, and Luke, with the exception, of course, and it is a real exception, of the penitent thief in Luke. Generally speaking, what I see in Matthew, Mark, and Luke are wide shots of the crucifixion, the sky going dark, the earthquake. John is remembering here. Yes, I'm sure he remembered all those things too, but John is remembering the most intimate details. And remember how I began this. A lot of seminarians will be taught in a lot of academic classes. So John focuses on the divinity exclusively, and then Matthew, Mark, and Luke are more in terms of the humanity. Notice what kind of statements John emphasizes here for his gospel. It's not, I have come into the world. No, he says, I thirst. What is more human than I thirst? What is more human than worrying about your mother? So I would say that John has a full view, as does Matthew, Mark, and Luke, of full humanity, full divinity. I believe that is very much there. Any last thoughts before we go into prayer requests? And I know we covered a lot of ground tonight. I'm very happy we got through the full Passion reading, basically, and I'm very privileged to receive all the wisdom and insights from each of you. Any last thoughts before we go into prayer?
I heard something interesting. I don't know if it's true. That the Bible doesn't say to celebrate the Easter, it says to celebrate the crucifixion. I haven't validated that. It's just thoughts for people. Just my thought. Maybe it's a hand grenade thought. Maybe
I'm all down for hand grenade thoughts. That's why we have this. And by the way, NSA, that is an allegory. If you want to.
I tend to have a stir up the pot conversation thing, but but not this late at night.
Yeah.
I apologize.
No, you're good.
No.
Sam, I hear the gears moving in your brain.
Yeah. Interesting. Celebrate the crucifixion, not the resurrection. Well, I think there's room for both because the resurrection is what we're placing our hope in.
When, in fact, what is the number one thing that Paul says so often? That
if there is no resurrection, forget it. Or just pity us. We're done. We're gone.
Exactly. Like 1 Corinthians 15 makes it really clear that the resurrection is.
Yeah.
And what I'd also say is on Mars Hill, when Paul preaches to the pagans, the Gentiles. Remember
I have to say on tape, I happen to think it's all about the resurrection.
Oh personally. Yeah, no. But I like controversial thoughts, and this is, by the way, what I hear of St.
I heard
Thomas.
someone say that. It was
St. Thomas Aquinas does this too, and it's in the Summa Theologica. You ask questions, and you go back and forth. That's why I love this. Yes, I'm an Aquinas buff, and if I was off the air, I would say ora pro nobis. Actually, I just did. So anyway, Ora pro nobis, Thomas Aquino. Ora pro nobis. Yeah, no, what I think is interesting here is that the resurrection of the Christ, for Paul, when he's preaching in Mars Hill, he says Anastasis, Anastasis, Anastasis so much, they assume that's the name of the God he's preaching, if you read the text close enough. It's like, who is this Jesus and this Anastasis who you're preaching? Which is really interesting. Bishop Robert Barron made that point, interestingly enough.
I kind of feel like the crucifixion is the planting of the seed that's been done by someone else, and the resurrection is the harvest of the fruit that we get to bear and enjoy.
They are as inseparable as the chocolate and the vanilla are in an Oreo cookie. And you can absolutely take that as
Danielle, what do you think about that? I have to ask.
Interesting. I would have gone with the Reese's Pieces with the peanut butter. But
I am a devoted disciple of the Reese's peanut butter cup, as my wife knows quite well.
Also M&M's.
You guys are funny.
You know, we could have gone that way. But yeah, you cannot have one without the other.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, what's that great song that came out a few years ago? It's Friday, but Sunday is coming.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
Right.
All right. Any other reflections before prayer requests?
Just going back to Pilate's answering, what I have written, I have written.
Can you just imagine Yul Brynner saying that? It's a shame you never got the chance to. It reminds me of, so let it be written, so let it be done.
Which is the kind of contrast to God being I am that I am. And this is what I have written, I have written.
At this point, he is so fed up with the authorities.
Yeah.
He's utterly fed up. Also, too.
What he has written is the truth.
I know you know this, Sam. But others, does anyone know from history the possibilities of what happened to Pilate post-resurrection?
Didn't they send him back to, I think they sent him to France eventually because he was deemed like too brutal. So they shipped him.
That is one long-standing theory that is very, 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 very potent. In fact, what we do know is that a lot of deposed leaders, I'm pretty sure Archelaus as well, ended up in southern Gaul. So, and of course, Mary Magdalene either dies in southern Gaul or in Ephesus. It depends on which tomb you accept. So it's very possible that after falling out with the Roman Empire, for his brutality with the Samaritans crushing a rebellion, he could have been murdered or exiled to Gaul. It would not surprise me if he had a powwow with some disciples later, but that's a fanfic for another time, which my heart would love to meditate on. And actually, more than a fanfic, there is some tradition that hints that, actually. But there's another theory. Does anyone know what the other theory is? What the Coptic Orthodox say about him and the Ethiopian Orthodox?
Don't say he converted.
I was just going to go there, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah, so there are icons.
Him and Herod became
Claudia.
friends. We know that, right?
There are icons of Saint Claudia and Saint Pontius Pilate, which exists to this day.
Saying Saint Pontius Pilate feels so wrong. I don't know if you get behind that.
But you're not the only one, Adam. I can actually assure you, from the bottom of my heart,
that was hilarious.
that the ancient Jewish historian Josephus would be rolling in his ossuary if he perceived that.
I hope he's a saint. I think it would be better if he was
You know
a saint.
what? You never know who you meet in heaven. So, yeah.
That's hilarious too.
I was just telling John the other day, I think it's so funny that in the Catholic Church and the Apostles' Creed, we say Pontius Pilate's name every Mass.
Same thing in the Episcopal Church in the Nicene Creed. We say he was crucified.
Right.
He was crucified under Pontius Pilate every week.
And technically in every Lutheran church, because technically the Apostles and Nicene Creed should be said every single service.
You
As well
know,
as the Divine Liturgy going all the ways back, by the way.
it's quite a mention. You know, every mass
Yeah.
you have that name there, and he is the one who uttered the famous, you know, what is truth? Quid est
What is-
veritas?
Yeah.
So Matt, do you believe that he came to faith?
Do I believe he came to faith? I hope so, and I pray for him. I do not know. I do not know. I will say anyone, like I mentioned earlier, who came face to face with Christ and wasn't of the mob mentality, was not necessarily within their own deafness. That wasn't in the deafness of the crowd. But I will say that Pontius Pilate was in the deafness of the Roman crowd, of the importance of his office of occupation, right? And I think the rock and the hard place that he suffered was, you know, he needed to prevent civil war. He needed to prevent, not civil war, rebellion. He needed to keep his own head amongst everything, and he needed to go about everything in a just way. And I think maybe it's quite possible, being in the presence of Christ and seeing the knot that is laid out before him and the choice laid out before him, and then also seeing the consequences of his actions. I can quite vividly imagine him later in life converting and being quite haunted by how everything played out, almost as if it was predestined to a degree.
It's funny you mentioned that, Matt. There is a text that's been floating around. Its historicity is very difficult to discern. It is a Latin manuscript. And it's not among the, well, I don't say hundreds, but dozens of forgeries coming from the Middle Ages, right? The Justus Pilati, things which claim to be testimonies of Pilate, where, you know, we can kind of discern that they're inaccurate. This one is a little different. And it actually makes the claim that he ends up exiled in Gaul, in France, and that there he's baptized, right? So it's certainly not outside the realm of possibility for me, at least, that Pilate could have had a change of heart. Stranger things have happened. Look at it, that guy called Saul of Tarsus who became Paul. So it certainly is possible. What is curious is just the disagreement among early Christians as to what did happen. It's as if when he went to Rome to see Tiberius, as if suddenly the whereabouts of the man become kind of foggy, which would happen either if he was murdered or, conversely, if he went into hiding or left into retirement. So all three are very real possibilities.
And I'll just say that I will steel man that it is more likely he probably went into hiding, because if he was executed, I'm not sure how quiet those were or how undocumented or public they were.
Yeah, and
But
as a Roman official, I think that would have been like written in huge, that would have been huge. You're executing a former governor of Judea.
Can you imagine how the early church, let's say we know for certain that Pilate was executed. Can you imagine how much of a rhetorical point that would have been? And you see Pilate got his comeuppance for not recognizing Jesus and washing his hands. The fact that that is not the universal opinion of the early church is pretty wild. And I think demonstrates more likely, in my opinion, that he survived his tribunal before Tiberius. He was brought up on charges. He was a very brutal man for crushing a rebellion in Samaria. The Samaritans wrote to Tiberius complaining, and of course Tiberius then calls him back to Rome, or calls him. And so for me, at least, I think it's more than plausible that he lived through it, which would have been shocking because Tiberius was into mass executions at this point. He was a very brutal emperor. He was on the island of Capri. Sam has been there. And he was involved in all kinds of not G-rated, more Epstein-y kind of activities in Capri. At least that was the rumor mill at the time. And we had, I believe that's in Tacitus. I have to double check. So, in other words, Pilate is going back to a brutal emperor, but like everybody's saying, had he been executed, I think we would have more smoke behind that fire. The fact that we don't is curious. So I have hope for Saint Pontius Pilate. I do. I really, really, really do. Even as strange as that sounds. Maybe the Coptic Orthodox have it right. I don't know. I don't know. Other thoughts? What time do we have?
It is 10:39.
Oh, dear Lord, now we need to do dinner. We're gonna head off to a very abbreviated version of prayer requests. Matt, let me know when you can stop the line.